Hi guys, welcome back to the Garage Lab. Super excited to have you here. Today our goal is to talk about another phylum within this section of invertebrates. We're almost through with all of our invertebrate discussions. I think we've got 3 total phylums left. But the phylum we're talking about today is one of my all-time favorites because it's full of these really distinctly different and like crazy cool and like just really funky creatures that are very exciting for us. Today we are talking about phylum Mollusks. It's gonna be awesome. So hang with me here. We'll pop up some screens and be good to go. All right. So today we're talking about mollusks, which are a type of invertebrate that are traditionally found in the sea, usually. We've got a really good song coming your way, so get pumped. At this point in time, you've got a couple different options with regards to how to actually take your notes. Option 1 is to watch this video in its entirety and then copy the notes that I've posted on Google Classroom into your notebook. Option number 2 is to take your notes as we go through the video. It's going to require you to pause at certain points, write for a minute, and then continue the video. Either way is fine. I do not care how you do it, either watching all the way through, putting your notes at the end, or watching and writing at the same time. Whatever's more convenient for you and your situation. Before we begin, let's start here. We're going to put mollusks as the title of our next page. It's in our table of contents. It has a page number and a date, and we're ready to go. If you've got this all titled up, what I'm going to have you do is flip to that super cool orange salmon, I don't know what color this is, paper that you have in the back of your folder. At this point, we've already filled up the whole first part of it, so you're actually at the opening stage. Up here at top, let's put phylum Mollusca. This is the next one that we're talking about here. Mollusks belong to phylum Mollusca, if we're going to use some super cool terminology. And you'll notice that there are 3 bullet points underneath. We're going to look at 3 specific classes within this big phylum, and they are all gross and cool. So Mollusca is going on this line here next to phylum on your orange coral piece of paper in the back of your notebook. And those 3 bullet points are going to be these 3 pieces here. One bullet point will say gastropods, the next one will say bivalves, and the final one will say cephalopods. These are the fancy names for these 3 different classes within this phylum of Mollusca, but I'm including them because I think it's a good like Latin-y reminder of some cool things that we have going on. Your gastropods is a type of mollusk that are made up of your snails and your slugs. We'll talk about why they're called gastropods here in a minute, but their name is actually like super informative. Bivalves are another type of mollusk. These guys are things like clams and oysters or shellfish that have 2 shells. Again, we'll talk about why they're called bivalves. And then this final group, my all-time favorite, are cephalopods. Those are your octopuses and your squids. And again, we'll talk about why they're called cephalopods. So those are going on those 3 bullet points here in the back of your notebook. So in phylum Mollusca, we're looking at 3 different groups: cephalopods, gastropods, and bivalves. Oh man, wouldn't it be convenient if we had a song to remember these? You know what, I'll just give it to you. We do have a song. This song is called Mollusks, They Live in the Sea Usually. In that mega packet that I sent home with you last week, I gave you a blue piece of paper that was long and looked something like this. These are the lyrics to this particular mollusks song. I found that watching YouTube videos while on the Zoom doesn't work super great, so I posted the link to this video underneath this on our Google Classroom. So you are welcome to check that out there. It's a great song. It's to the tune of 99 bottles of pop on the wall, and you will never forget the 3 different classes of mollusks. So give that a good listen. I think it is helpful and also like really fun. All right, but we're going to start today by looking at our 3 different phylums of mollusks. We're going to begin with gastropods. These guys here are all gastropods. Living in Tucson, Arizona, we don't tend to see these gastropods out and about all of the time. But what we're looking at are snails and slugs. What is the difference between a snail and a slug? The shell, nice. So we're going to say here that if you have a shell, you're a snail. So this is a snail, this is a snail, this is a snail, this is a snail. No shell, this guy here is a slug. But they're similar in body structure, right? They're both long, kind of slimy looking with these 2 little antennae things on the top. Gastropods are unique in a lot of different ways. First things first, all of our mollusks as a whole are more complicated than any of those other phylums that we've talked about. They're more complicated than your roundworms, your flatworms, your annelid worms, your sponges, your cnidarians, all those guys. These guys have more complicated tissues, they have more specialized parts, and they have bigger brains. These guys here, your snails and slugs, have actually very specialized parts. They have what's called a radula, which means that their tongue is covered basically with tiny teeth. And they use those tiny teeth to basically scrape food off of stuff. This is a picture of a radula on a snail. Here's its mouth, and you can see these ridged pieces. These are the radula that kind of scrape like stuff off of other stuff, which is kind of gross. But we're gonna call gastropods, putting on our cool Latin brains for a minute. This pod suffix is gonna tell us that we're talking about feet, and this gastro prefix is gonna tell us we're talking about stomachs. So this guy is basically meaning stomach foot. And if you take a look at your song lyrics, in this first, or I guess it's the second main chorus here, it says, gastropods, a group of snails, stomach foot's its name. It leaks mucus as it moves, so it won't be in pain. These gastropods are basically gonna release mucus as they slide along. They have like a stomach foot situation, which is pretty gross and cool. And they also have a pretty complex brain. All right, moving right along, we're gonna look at our second class of mollusks, which are our bivalves. These are things like clams and oysters and mussels and other types of shellfish that have two valves, two shells. A univalve has how many shells, do you think? You're right, it's only gonna have one. Again, using here our cool Latin brains, this bi prefix is telling us two, and then valves is telling us how many they have two of, so two valves. These guys here, again, more complicated than any other phylum that we've talked about, more complicated than your earthworms or your roundworms or your flatworms, more complicated stuff. Big complicated brain. For the most part, these guys are not gonna move around too much. They tend to situate themselves in one location and then filter feed their food through these funky gills that they have. You can kind of see some of these gills back here. Okay, last group that we're gonna look at, arguably my favorite and the most important one, are cephalopods. Cephalopods are things like octopuses and squids. Here's a squid. This is an octopus, an octopus, an octopus. This is a chambered nautilus. It's also technically a cephalopod. It's on my notebook cover if you guys are curious about it. I'll chat about it with you. But your cephalopods for the most part is gonna be your octopuses and your squids. These guys are going to be drastically different than our other two classes within this mollusk phylum, which is actually really, really interesting for us. They're kind of a special exception here. And we'll watch a couple of videos in a minute that kind of explain why they're so special. But these guys are not filter feeders like our bivalves. They're not really slow and steady movers like our gastropods. These octopuses and squids can move through the ocean water incredibly quickly, right? They've got these long legs that they can use to propel themselves through the water, and they can use their long legs' tentacles to grab food and then eat it. And these guys, out of all of our classes, in fact, out of all the creatures we talked about so far, have the most advanced nervous system. Really complicated systems of neurons and ganglia with a big central brain. They are crazy smart. They're also gonna have what we're gonna call an open circulatory system, which just means that their circulatory system is more complicated than anything we've talked about so far. They've got like a network of aortas that they pump blood through, and it kind of recycles itself rather than just dumping into one location like our earlier animals did. I'm gonna have you also, again, right, it's hard to watch videos through this platform, so I've posted the link to it here. For this video here, it's about octopuses, how they're a little bit different than your other types of mollusks and why they're potentially different. And also the pitfall that we tend to fall into when we talk about animal intelligence. It's something I think is really interesting and worthwhile for us to think about. But we as human beings think about intelligence in terms of our own experience, right? I'm a human being and I'm smart because I can use tools, I can communicate with other people, and I have emotions. Maybe this isn't the best way for us to think about how intelligent animals are. It's just something for us to start thinking about as we move forward into more interesting and exciting creatures. I also have a couple more interesting videos that I'd like you to watch because octopuses are so sneaky. They are so smart and so capable, and they have these huge, incredible limbs that they can do some really cool things with. And octopuses are famous for being escape artists. And so I have 2 videos that I'd like you to watch about octopuses escaping from small places. This video here, again, the links will be below, is an octopus escaping out of a tiny 1-inch hole, so about that big. And then this one here is a huge octopus escaping through a slightly larger hole on a boat. It's kind of cool. A spoiler alert here, these octopuses are able to fit through such small spaces because they have no backbone, right? They are an invertebrate. And because they are an invertebrate, they are squishy creatures. They're just like a ball of mush. In fact, the only hard part on an octopus is this bit right here. It's called the beak, and it's at the bottom where all their tentacles kind of meet. And it's the only part of their body that's not flexible. So really, an octopus can fit through any space that its beak can slide through. So this is much smaller than 1 inch. This guy could easily fit through a 1-inch hole. Here's a bigger octopus. Here's a small beak right in there. He can fit through any hole that this guy can fit through. He can smush this gigantic head into like a tiny hole. I think that's absolutely nuts. And like it's kind of like a really cool thing for us to think about. So give these videos a watch. Let me know what you think, because I think they are really, really cool. Okay, it's kind of a lot right there. So far we said all of our mollusks fall into one of 3 categories. They are a gastropod, a bivalve, or a cephalopod. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Why are these guys called a cephalopod? This pod suffix, again, is telling us about feet. What about cephalo? Like, what is a cephal? That's gonna be your head. This is like a head foot guy. Right? They've got those big old heads and those big tentacles. That's why we'll call them cephalopods. Okay, so we know those are the groups that all of our mollusks fall into, but now the question is, what is it that sets your mollusks apart from other invertebrate phyla? And we're gonna say that a mollusk is a mollusk if it's got 3, sometimes 4 main body parts. Most of our mollusks have a foot, a visceral mass, a mantle, and a shell. And if you'll notice in that big packet that I sent home with you last week, you had something that looked kind of like, whoop, oh my gosh, I just ripped my notebook in half. Like this, like a diagram of a snail, a clam, and a squid with a little key at the bottom. We're gonna glue that into our notebook and we're gonna do a little bit of coloring because we wanna be able to identify these 4 body parts in 3 of our different classes within our phylum. Before we get there though, a couple things. In general, on a mollusk, a foot, believe it or not, is used for movement. Crazy. You may look at an octopus or a clam or a snail and you'd be like, they don't have feet like ours, but we're gonna call the structure that they use to move their foot. And we'll look at some examples here in just a second. We're also gonna look at their visceral mass. Their visceral mass is basically all of their important organs. It's their guts and their gills and their hearts and their digestive tracts, all the important stuff that they need in order to function as an organism. And for the most part, when we find these in our gastropods and our bivalves and our cephalopods, they tend to be located at the center of the animal's body. They're gonna be at the center of the body because that's the place that's easiest to protect. Right? This is important stuff. You gotta keep your heart and your guts nice and safe. You don't want those like far out on a limb. You want them nice and tight in the center of your body. We're gonna next look at our mantle. Your mantle is a layer of protection that surrounds your visceral mass as protection, right? It keeps it nice and safe, it keeps it compact, it prevents it from being injured in the process of going about your animal life. And then last but not least, we're gonna find a shell. The shell is on the outermost edge of your animal, on the outside of your mantle, that protects your mollusks from predators and keeps all the moisture locked inside so your mollusk doesn't dry out. So let's look at some of our animals and where we can actually find these 4 mollusk features in a particular class of mollusca. So this guy here is a gastropod. He's a snail. And we're gonna start on the outside and work our way in. Here's a key up top. If I were you, I would color each of these different pieces a different color. I would say my foot is, you can use the same colors as me, you don't have to, is one color, my visceral mass is another color, your mantle is another color, and your shell is a different one. And then let's locate those items here on our actual structure. So starting on the outside, we have what's most obviously the shell, which here is denoted with this green color. You can look at a snail and be like, that's a shell, right? It's hard, it's on the outside. Sometimes it's cool colors. But that shell's main job here is to protect everything. We're also going to see the foot here on the outside, which is this brown bit down here. This part that actually leaks mucus as it trails, so it won't be in pain. This foot is going to allow your snail to move and go about its day-to-day business. On the inside most part, we have this big purple junky piece. This is your visceral mass. Here's like your esophagus and like your stomach and your heart and all his important organs. And between the shell and the visceral mass is this pink layer, which is here. This pink layer is your mantle. And the mantle's main job is to protect your visceral mass from the shell, right? If these sensitive organs were banging up against this hard shell, there'd be a lot of damage done. So this visceral mass is protected from the shell by the mantle, which is kind of like a cushion, keeps it nice and safe. So go ahead and color those 4 features in on a snail so that we know that they are there. And moving right along, I know we're going quick, but you can pause me at any time. All right, next one here, we're gonna look at a bivalve. We're gonna look specifically at a clam. This picture is as if you took your clam and you ripped the top off. So you're only looking at the bottommost shell. We've removed one of those shells in order to see this picture. Again, starting on the outside, we have our green shell, which is here on the outside. We have our pink mantle, which is in between our shell and our visceral mass. Our visceral mass is here. We've got a stomach, some intestines, some gills, all those important organs that are allowing our animal to function. And then we have this big brown piece here, which is your foot, which is funny because you don't really think about clams actually like moving around a lot, but they do have a hard, muscly foot that they can use to kind of like scurry themselves along. In fact, when we do our muscle dissection here next week, we'll be able to see all of these features when we take apart those shells. But big takeaways here: shell, mantle, visceral mass, and a foot. And last but not least, we're going to look at our cephalopod. And looking at our cephalopod, our immediate most noticeable difference between this squid and our clam and our snail is the lack of a shell. Right? This squid does not have a hard outer covering that protects it, which is something that's incredibly interesting and special for our cephalopods. But they have all the other stuff. Right? They've got a visceral mass here on the inside, a mantle around their visceral mass that kind of does the job of a shell for us. It protects this guy from the outside. And then a foot, which is going to be their tentacles in this case, that allow them to move through the water. When you watch that SciShow video, you'll see a discussion relatively briefly about why these squids potentially don't have shells, which is something I think is really cool. And I'm excited for you to watch it so we can chat about it. The big takeaways for us here: in this phylum of mollusks, we've got 3 main classes: gastropods, bivalves, cephalopods. Most of our mollusks have 4 main body parts: a shell, a mantle, a visceral mass, and a foot. You've got a cool song, some neat diagrams, and some notes to get into your notebook. Go ahead and pop those in for me, and then watch those YouTube videos below. If you have any questions, I'm in the Zoom. Pop in there and give me a chat, and we'll get your questions nice and sorted out. When I see you next, we will actually dissect a mollusk. We're going to be dissecting a freshwater mussel. It'll be pretty exciting and cool. I will have a mystery guest with me. Okay, that's it for now. Have a great rest of your day. I will see you way soon. Bye. I'm still here. Bye.